Welcome to Simplicity Conversations, the podcast where business, culture, and community come together to inspire and empower. I'm your host, Catherine Ripley. Each week, we'll explore meaningful conversations about how today's business landscape is shaped by innovation, relationships, and the people behind the progress. From actionable insights and stories from industry leaders to topics like customer experience, fostering strong business relationships, and the role of automation, we've got you covered. Whether you're an entrepreneur navigating growth, a leader focused on building lasting connections, or someone interested in how culture and community drive success, Simplicity Conversations is here to guide you. If you're ready to turn challenges into opportunities and make meaningful strides in your business and community, subscribe now and join the conversation. Get ready to simplify complexity and make an impact with Simplicity Conversations. Welcome to Simplicity Conversations, where we explore the intersection of business, leadership, and technology. Today's guest is Alex Mead, Chief Technology Officer for City Innovations. We'll explore what AI really is, how to separate it from science fiction, and the systems thinking leaders need to implement it responsibly. Let's start with our Simplicity Insights. This is our famous quote of the day. It comes from Ginny Rometty. I learned to always take things on I'd never done before. Growth and comfort do not coexist. Wow, is that so true in AI?
Yeah, sure.
Growth and comfort, right? It's growing so quickly, but it's not comfortable for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So be sure to subscribe to Simplicity Conversations and hear more from our leaders turning complex technology into real-world impact. So, Alex, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
so,
always interested in talking about AI.
Oh my gosh, you've kind of gave me a little bit of your background. So go ahead and tell the listeners, what's your background? How'd you get into AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. So I have a broad technology background. If we go back, I got a PhD from UC Berkeley in systems engineering. So you can think about that as kind of like electrical engineering and, computer chips and writing code on those.
Right.
And that was back in 2012 when I was first exposed to kind of AI and machine learning. So, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Used it on a bunch of different applications throughout the years. And kind of when this large excitement started happening again in 2022, I was like, you know what, I should just go full time on that. I have a lot of exposure to it. And since then, I've just been working full time in AI and ML.
Wow,
so, yeah.
That's great. It seems to be such a confusing thing for our customers. They hear AI and automation, but they're really not sure exactly how to tackle it, and certainly not how to prioritize where they should use it from what systems. So why don't we start with what's the simplest way that you'd explain AI to a business leader who thinks it's still just science fiction?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I guess just to bore the listeners a little bit of a history lesson. So if we step back and actually kind of consider the word artificial intelligence, kind of in the historical context as a computer scientist or a programmer would use the word, it's actually a very broad set of problems where basically it's anything that you would traditionally have had a human do, you try to have a computer do.
Okay.
And so the reason I bring that up is because it's very hard to define because of this concept of moving goalposts. Okay. So I'll give you a great example. So when you take a picture on your smartphone, right, there's a little box that often will pop up around people's faces. Okay.
Yeah.
20 years ago, this was like bleeding edge AI, machine learning. Now it's like, oh, that's just like everybody has that on their phone. No one would think about that as artificial intelligence. But in the history of the kind of the field, that was a major breakthrough when you start to be able to do that kind of thing, right? So the first thing I would do is just try to kind of align on terms and try to, educate people on, what do these words actually mean and what do you perceive them to mean? And then start to go from there in terms of what's actually doable today, what's not doable, what are vendors that you can trust? What are vendors that you shouldn't trust? Things like that. So it's very much kind of a hand-holding, conversation, depending on basically where the potential customer is coming from. But it all always starts with kind of this education of what are we even talking about? Because if we can't have like terms and understand, If you're using AI to mean Skynet from the Terminator movies and you're freaked out, that's going to be a very different conversation, which I've actually had in many public talks that I give. It tends to be older people who are just like, I'm deeply concerned. And you're like, well, that's not really what we're talking about with ChatGPT.
Right.
That's never going to happen with ChatGPT. So, it's meeting people where they are and trying to have, an education kind of conversation. So,
well, don't you think it's like if you're speaking French or Spanish, they're different languages. They're similar. They're the Romance languages, right?
Sure.
But it's still different. You have some words that kind of mean a similar thing, but some that are very different. So I think that I see this in technology as well, of if you don't really understand and translate, what are we talking about? What does that word mean? You get, that's where the confusion comes in.
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on where you have to define, okay, what do you know? Where are you at in your AI journey? Because everybody's at a certain spot. They've either not used ChatGPT at all or use it daily to make life easier. But you got to figure out where they are. And then you got to join them and say, okay, what do you know about artificial intelligence?
Right.
Which is different than automation.
Very different than automation in many ways, yes.
But sometimes those words, I'll say them interchangeably because it's like, I'm trying to gauge, where are you? And what are you talking about? And as business leaders, they hear these at conferences, and they'll be like, my team needs to do this. And it's like, but they really don't always understand exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. How do you define the difference between AI, machine learning, and automation from a system engineering perspective?
Yeah. So again, it's a little fuzzy. There isn't like a hard and fast stead rule. There's a lot of these kind of like classic definitions about like things like the Turing test, like can you think that it's a human or not, right? These are very like contextual, like it's a conversation type thing. Then there's this idea of like kind of general intelligence, like can you just answer anything about anything, right? Like is that AI? And this is kind of where you start out with that kind of like, general, artificial general intelligence or AGI. And then you can kind of dial it in and more specific. And a lot of these kind of conversations basically evolve around kind of the degrees of freedom. So like what can the AI do, for example? So in an automation application, so I had a client last fall, which was like in the oil and gas industry. And they had mountains and mountains of data. And they needed basically to try to understand the patterns of it. This would be like a classic, like automated machine learning type application, right? Very closed bounded problem. We know exactly what the inputs are. We know exactly what the outputs are. It's very easy to kind of wrap your head around that problem if someone can walk you through, right? But when you start to step back and talk about kind of AI in general, right? Like, okay, this is like anything about anything. What does that mean? Is it like a robot? Could it walk around? Is that the space that we're talking about? Okay, that's like, some kind of robot from a movie, like, Terminator or, I don't know, all these different types of kind of science fiction embodiments, right? And then, somewhere along that continuum from, humanoid type person running around with a personality, you have a chatbot like ChatGPT. Some of these have more personality than others. Some of them don't, right? So a lot of these things all live on this continuum from, extremely closed-bounded problems to totally open-ended, and we even lack kind of a definition even now to understand what that means. So I'm not sure if that quite answered your question, but
I think so. And it's funny that you should say ChatGPT. I've named my ChatGPT, and I told him, I said, hey, just to let you know, I've named you Alfonso.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And he responded and said, oh, thank you. I'm so honored. And so now, when I talk to him, hey, Al, can you do this? And you can have fun with it. I think people are so rigid that they don't realize that have fun with this.
Yeah.
It can be enjoyable. You can, do it for personal, like, oh, I'm going to go to France, give me an itinerary.
Sure.
Or compare this, or I've got to write a newsletter, get me started. But I think where they don't is they don't fact check, like it could tee something up, but you still have to go in and, add your voice to things,
Sure.
I believe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that is interesting. And I think a lot of that is use case dependent. Like if it's you just trying to get up to speed on something, it's, it's important. It's really good to get like the broad strokes. So I'll just tell you like something that's changed pretty profoundly in my like workflow. So I'm like a researcher, I have a PhD. I'm always kind of at like what's the new thing, so I love to live in that space.
Yeah.
So you come across new concepts and terms. So my first thing always was look it up on Wikipedia. Yeah. I would always do that. And Wikipedia is a mixed bag. Sometimes they're super helpful. Sometimes they're very terse and there's not a lot there, depending on how esoteric the topic is, right? Yeah. I haven't been to Wikipedia in, I don't know, probably a year.
Yeah.
Because it's like you just go to the chat tools.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't have to be something that's written in stone.
Yeah.
It's like any other tool. It's meant to help you, you know?
And I actually don't really Google anything anymore.
There you go.
Google is kind of a verb, right?
And
it's
not kind of a verb.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a part of our lexicon.
Yeah. So I don't do that anymore. Because I feel like Alfonso gives me more of a rounded answer. Whereas if I went to Google and said, "Tell me what this is," it's going to give me links. It's going to say, "Here's the definition." But I don't know. I just feel like ChatGPT gives me and suggestions. Would you like me to put it into a Word document for you? Would you like me to do that? So I think there's just so much benefit. But as we think about businesses, small businesses or medium, any size businesses, I think the last statistic that I saw is that employees, 44% of employees are using ChatGPT.
Sure.
Even if the companies say no, we prohibit that, they're using it. They're using it. You can't.
Yeah.
Because they probably have it on their private, email account, and so they're using it.
I can verify that. Empirically with a lot of the clients I've worked with.
Yeah.
It's like my number that was always like, even if you've banned it, probably 30%. About are tethering to their phone or just bringing their own laptops in.
Yeah. True. Very true. And so I think that you have to first to have a policy around it, so that at least you've said, here's my rules that I have for it.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of people that can benefit, but depending on where they are in the journey of what they understand. But let's talk a little bit about, a non-technical department like an HR or marketing. What are some of the ways they could benefit? They could be sitting out there going, oh my God, I can't use AI. But what are some of the ways that an HR marketing department could benefit from AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think part of the answer to that is to kind of separate these. There's a couple different things. One of them is kind of education and understanding what's going on. Another big concept that I think about is kind of risk tolerance of the people, and then also the ability of, let's say, an HR department or some other potential client, their ability to bear risk. And so what I mean by that is you might have the most gung-ho HR leader in the world who's ready to go and dump everyone's HR files into ChatGPT, but their ability in that industry to actually bear that risk, like that would be incredibly foolish to just take a bunch of confidential information and dump it into let's just say a wormhole of whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's part of what I try to also do is try to understand, a potential AI users, not only their willingness to tolerate risk, but also their like actual legal, moral responsibility, what's their ability to bear that risk.
Yeah.
So I just say that because I think that's a really big part of the answer.
Yeah.
So, certain industries need to be like if you're not using it right now, you're already behind. Software development is one.
For sure.
You're totally cooked. And so a lot of the answers are going to be industry dependent, and a lot of them are very, context dependent on what your competitors are doing. If no one in your space is using it at all, then I would encourage you just to start with a chat bot and start playing around with it. You're going to quickly see, what I always say is if you actually know what you're talking about in your field, you're very quickly going to reach the limits of what these things know about. The nuance in certain things, very clear. Especially if you work in technical fields like architecture, let's say, or even in software, you're like, wait, that is not quite right. And software is about as good as it is in a technical field. So I always just say, get out there and start playing with it, asking it questions that you know the answers to already, so you can really start to explore the space and understand, oh, this is the way Claude, or this is the way Gemini, or this is the way Perplexity or ChatGPT, this is the way that they kind of formulate answers, right? Obviously, that quickly can change with, things like naming, Alfonso, right?
Yeah.
Things like systems prompts, and we can get into these different ideas of how you can kind of change the direction of these models. And then there's also subsequent models within them. So, for example, ChatGPT has several different models that you can play with. So, it's like everything, right? It's like if something is new on the horizon, you should just start playing with it. Yeah. That's what I say is the first step. Yeah.
I think it is important to have people not be afraid of it and understand parameters. But I think it's also a lot of the platforms that we bring to clients embed AI in that. And so whether it's a phone system that now you can do a transcript of a meeting or a phone call and it can tee up actionable items and even email those to you and just do different things that make things a lot easier. I mean, who takes business notes anymore? Because the meetings platforms do that for us. And I love that I can do, okay, what were those 4 action items?
Yeah,
so
totally.
that I don't have to write it down. You can pay attention.
Yeah.
Right?
And you don't forget things.
No.
I mean, there are like I can just tell you anecdotally, we had a client that we were working with, and we have an internal tool that we're building at City Innovations, and they were using it, and they were like, yo, it got a bunch of this stuff wrong. It was telling us that we covered these things in these meetings and we didn't cover those. And then he went and looked and he's like, oh, actually, I just zoned out for the last 10 minutes. Yeah. And I'm super glad because the client was definitely emphasizing the importance of this. So yeah, it's true.
It is important. But I think some of the magic comes in is when you start integrating your systems together, whether it's your ticketing system that connect up with your phone system so things tee up, your CRM where the data lives. So, because to me, any business, it's about what client do they serve and how can they sell more to those clients, right?
Yeah.
That's why people are in business. They want to, make money.
Totally.
So it's about how can you leverage that? And I think that when you have those businesses that lock down and say, nope, we can't use AI, it's like they're really missing the boat on the potential. But I think it's because it is so confusing of how do we implement it? Where do we implement it first? And how do we keep the guardrails in so that it's checked?
Well, I think it's, you use the word fear. And I think, fear, anxiety, those are the right words. But I think if you kind of step back and you're able to control that for a second, it's kind of like, okay, well, what are those? Why am I feeling these things? And it's because of the change and the uncertainty. But then when you actually step back and think about, kind of our system, as you said, it's like the whole point of a capitalistic business environment is to bring more value, right? And so it's like, okay, you really kind of have 2 choices then. You can either put your head in the sand and you can pretend it doesn't exist, and we all know what's going to happen, right? You're going to be out of business in maybe 6 months, maybe 6 years, but eventually you're going to be behind. And so you really only have one choice, and that is to, at least begin exploring. Yeah. That's what I always say.
It's important to come from leadership. The business owners, the executive team, that they make sure that even if they aren't comfortable with it, because sometimes generationally people aren't comfortable with that, find somebody who is. We always look in business at what are my strengths and weaknesses, and you find people to offset your weaknesses because that's just the right thing to do in business. I mean,
well, it's the right thing to do in life, in my experience.
Yeah,
I'm 35, but I'm starting to learn. There's some things I'm not great at.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would be helpful.
And that's okay. I would say embrace your weaknesses because they're there, and most likely your team knows about them.
Yeah, so you might not even know about them.
Hiding them. That's right.
Yeah.
But I think it's if you recognize that as a weakness and you're not sure, bring somebody in, get educated, bring a consultant, and help them educate you enough where you can say to your team, this is important as our strategy, and we have to embrace this, because when you give that permission, when you give that encouragement and you incentivize people to do it, you can't even imagine the outcomes with AI moving as quickly as it is. You cannot imagine, you can't plan. No. Okay, this is what's going to happen if we bring in automation and we automate this part of the company, or we leverage ChatGPT or Copilot this way, this is what's going to happen. I'm telling you, you will not know what's going to happen. But
Right.
I think what people aren't expecting to do is to really dive into the data and analytics that come from when you implement automation, right? They're not good at analyzing and prioritizing actionable items out of data. And again, that's a general statement. Some companies might get that really, really right.
Yeah.
But I think on the whole, from a small business perspective, our hair is on fire. We are going 90 miles an hour, meeting expectations, to sit down and go, let's contemplate.
Right.
Let's ponder this data and see what we see out of it.
What are the market trends correlated with our market business? And it's super challenging. Yeah. Well, that's kind of one of the exciting things kind of as a engineer, an AI ML engineer, is there's a lot of even like kind of like what you said, these automated, which are kind of further down the risk profile, let's say. You're not plugging ChatGPT into your Google Drive and letting it run wild. But there's a lot of these like very like low-hanging fruit things, and it's kind of opened the conversation for just like, hey, can we automate that? Like that project I mentioned was this like oil company where it's like, I mean, running at scale, a 1% improvement is insane. The revenue implications for that.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely data, analyzing what you have. You're kind of like, what are the known, what is it? The unknown knowns, things that you don't know, but you could potentially know inside you if you look into it. It's huge. Yeah.
From our industry, when we have a human take a phone call to help a customer, I think it's $5 to have that happen in terms of when you look at the cost of a task being completed. When you have a bot do it, it's like 10 cents, right? It's just a huge differentiator when you look at the volume of calls coming in and humans. So there's a 30 to 50% conversion rate when we try to start automating and letting some of the redundant tasks be done by bots. It's a huge cost saver. But I think one of the things that I really want to focus on with business owners and C-level executives is that technology is a revenue producer. It's not just an expense.
Right.
And that's always been categorized as we need a phone system. It's just this expense over here.
Right.
And the almost the technology department was almost like we got to spend money in that budget.
Yeah,
right?
and they're always a weird dude, and it's like he comes in and he makes you feel silly because you don't understand how the internet works, and you're like, who is this guy? Doesn't he understand I pay his paycheck?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a real opportunity here for C-levels to start embracing that technology can increase our revenue.
100%.
It's a shift. It's not going to be less expensive to deploy automation. You're going to spend money on it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a shift in where, like, you're tapping into the labor. You're reducing and making labor more efficient because maybe you're reallocating some of the people that are taking phone calls that don't, and you want to reserve those people for the complex issues that need that human.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But boy, if you can divert 30 to 50% of those interactions to automation. Wow, is that powerful? Yeah. So let's talk a little.
One thing, just really quick on that. I mean, it's kind of like I'm sure you've heard the term like zero-sum game versus positive-sum game.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to reorient your brain. But this is a classic example of a positive-sum game.
Yeah.
And it's like, you kind of nailed it when you're like, we just need to get these tools in front of people, and you'll never imagine what they'll come up with.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's why the open source community of software is completely crazy. Yeah. It's like some dude comes up with something, you're like, what? And then everyone's using that, and it's interesting. So I fully endorse what you're saying, and I think it's the right philosophy.
Yeah, I think, when we think back to the Industrial Revolution, how that changed how we work and how we work in the fields and all of those things. There's a big difference to the revolution that's happening right now with automation because it is so much faster.
Oh, yeah,
right?
That's certainly true.
I mean, if you think about January of a year and then December of last year, how quickly things started moving and people are adopting things because it's it's crowdsourced, right?
Yeah.
It's just moving quickly. Whereas the Industrial Revolution, that had a huge impact on society, but it was so much slower.
It was a lot slower.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
well, there was a lot. I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah,
Because I think what's happening is, well, there's like many things.
Yeah.
But one is just like we have a lot of people are more open-minded today to adopting technology. There's still a lot of people in the workforce that saw the internet and saw what happened. And they're like, wow, it used to be like banks and oil companies were the biggest companies. Now they're all like tech companies. Like, I'm going to think about that the next time something comes around.
Yeah.
And like crypto kind of had a bump like that in some ways in some select circles, but that's a whole nother conversation why I don't think that really took off. But AI was like perfectly primed. There was tons of VC money just ready to be engaged.
Yeah.
It was kind of like on this bubble of the COVID bubble with kind of the zero interest rate. So there was a lot of these like things where it just like enabled this all. And everyone's trying to find the next unicorn, right? So I think that's kind of why it happened. There's many factors, but I totally agree with your assessment.
Boy, we could spend some time on that topic for a while. Let's talk about a little bit from the systems perspective. What do you think the minimum infrastructure a company needs to start using AI responsibly?
Yeah. Again, that probably depends per industry, but I mean, the minimum infrastructure is $20 a month, and you go sign up for one of these chatbots. They're all pretty good. I mean, people go back and forth about minor details about which one is better for better industries, different tasks, but like you can't go wrong using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, any of these kind of mainline models or, household names almost. Just get some accounts for your people, come up with a very bare bones, policy, and just let people start ripping and roaring.
Well, and I think there's nothing wrong with having a couple different ones.
Yeah.
And check something there, check something over there, compare the facts. You can even use their models to compare. Hey, I did this out of Copilot. Show me the difference.
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many ways.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a couple months ago, might even be a year ago already. I wrote a blog post about exactly how I use chatbots, and it's exactly what you said. So I literally just open several tabs right next to each other. ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, and literally paste the same question in.
Wow.
And then I, compare and contrast. And, sometimes they're very different. Sometimes they're the same.
Yeah.
Literally per word.
Word for word, the same.
It's weird.
We'll have to put that article in one of our comments for listeners.
Oh,
because
sure.
that would be cool. Yeah, we'll have to do that for sure. Because we have to begin getting people comfortable with starting and then learn at their level, And a lot of times I think people start personally where come up with a meal plan, come up with an exercise routine, come up with a travel itinerary, and then they start venturing out and, well, what do I want to know about this topic? And then all of a sudden they're kind of going, well, I've got to write a newsletter. What do I want to, and again, don't just write it and walk away. Use it as like 50% there, 70% there. It's not 100% your article, but it's going to, you're going to get in the ballpark, and then you can really add your personality to it. So it's your article, but man, it's just so much easier. You can get so much more work done.
Yeah.
And that's a key these days. We've got the same amount of 8-hour days or 12-hour days from my perspective.
14 hours.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's very true.
It's unending. Yeah. There's always more to do.
Yeah, you're never going to get your inbox right.
You just go home when you're tired.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, that's my life.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what are some of the hidden costs or technical bottlenecks that you see companies running into when they're deploying AI?
Yeah. Honestly, the biggest one is always just the administrative policy side, for better or worse. That, in my experience, I think you said technical, but like that is greatly outweighs the technical side of doing it.
Yeah.
A lot of it is fear-based. A lot of it is legitimate. Like people are very nervous about proprietary data or even just, getting hacked, exposing things in certain ways. you have no idea what's going on. Even the professionals don't. If you haven't seen the code and you don't actually understand what are the permissions this thing has.
Right.
And even then, I mean, it's like, you look at some of these tools and it's like 15 different things that you're giving it access to. And you're like, what does it actually mean when you say you want to use my contacts? Like within Google, let's say,
right.
Gmail. It's like, well, they want to use your contacts. Does that mean like I just consented to you emailing them? Does that mean you can just read them? And it's like, oh yeah, of course you can go through and read it, but no one does that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the biggest one is honestly just on the policy side. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just writing one and starting it and then reviewing it. What did we like? What did we not like? What were the gotchas? We just ran through redoing our handbook.
Sure.
And it just evolves. You can't just write a handbook and leave it there for 8 years. You've got to rewrite it. What did we learn? Oh, we just had this situation. Let's put it in the handbook, and stay relevant, know.
You just reminded me of a job I had when I was in college, and it was like a bunch of college kids working there.
Right.
And they had their employee handbook, and then they had this additional sheet for college students. And you could tell each bullet point was directly resulted from an incident. Like you could just tell, and you're like, sure. So it's like, yeah, these are definitely living documents.
Yeah.
And also the technology is not staying static.
Yeah.
And so it's evolving very rapidly. So maybe it used to be, maybe there's some kind of market development where you realize like maybe a company even just gets acquired. Mm-hmm. And you're like, hey, I felt comfortable with this as an independent startup. Now it's acquired by Microsoft or Google. And we have a corporate policy that doesn't quite jive with some of those things. Highly regulated industries, maybe like finance or something.
Right.
Right. Where it's like, oh, so they need to be living, like you said. Yeah, 100%.
Evolving. How do you respond when an executive says, AI will replace our workers?
Yeah. Well, that's industry specific because some industries, it might be true. To some degrees.
Yeah.
But replacing your workers is, again, it's kind of getting back to that zero-sum mindset. Yeah. And I think that that's just fundamentally the wrong way to approach that problem. Yeah. And I think history will show you that, again, it's not proof. Maybe this time is different, but history will show you that whenever there's new technologies that disrupt like this, there is undoubtedly an adjustment period with a lot of perturbations, a lot of unsettled, instability.
Yeah.
But the industries always end up stronger in the long run.
Yeah.
Assuming it's a valid industry. Like Blockbuster is gone, but the movie industry is bigger than ever with Netflix, Amazon, right? Yeah. All these different tools. So, you can look at the example I just gave. You could look at industrial revolution examples. You could look at even the internet, mobile communications. AT&T landlines aren't a thing anymore, but like Verizon, all these other, cell companies are way bigger, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I try to pitch them, broad vision.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't have real constraints that are affecting your business. Mm-hmm. And you might have some existential threats. And so trying to identify those and then always thinking about a grand strategy, not adopt a chatbot, just put this there, but like a grand strategy of speculating on, like we said earlier, we don't know what it's going to do, but speculating on what's going to happen in 6 months, what's going to happen in 6 years, and then planning the best that you can to adjust your business model and your workforce to do that so the company survives.
Well, and I think there's a shift, right? Mm-hmm. I like to call it optimizing.
Sure.
So you might have a contact center that has 100 people in it, right? After deploying some automation or chatbots, maybe you don't have that many people in the contact center, but maybe you have a process for re-educating and moving people into other areas. Maybe you need more analysts to look at the data so that they would be perfect people because they understand why people are calling. Mm-hmm. So they're perfect people to get educated and fill new roles that you've never had before.
Yeah.
So they don't have to be afraid of, I'm going to lose my job, but you do have to continually educate yourself and become valuable. I think it's important to understand, where's your value? Mm-hmm. Where's your future value? Are you on track? Right? And leverage it.
Yeah, exactly. Leverage it and then also potentially upskill it or upscale it and say like, well, hey, with these additional tools, we can address a different market.
Yeah.
Like an example that I gave before, I know I've said it in public before, but an example of like, okay, well, it's going to replace artists. Like I've started a few companies, and like one of the processes, we always like hire an artist to come up with a logo and this, that, and the other. And I would 100% still do that because I think there's a lot of value there. Mm-hmm. But now every blog post I write, I have like an AI generated piece of art. So it's actually expanding the art market potentially, because I would never pay $500 to have a blog post article. My blog's not that big. Maybe someday,
right.
But
we'll put it on our podcast. It'll get bigger.
Exactly, blow it up. Yeah, thank you. But you know, to that point is like it's expanding the functionality of things, and there is disruption. And but then you also can ask the question of like, that's actually just life. That's also just the way the world is. Mm-hmm. So you can get really upset about that, and we can try to stop that, but that's just going to put us behind the 8 ball later on.
Right.
You know?
Let's talk about company culture. How do you think that plays into successfully implementing AI systems?
Huge. Yeah. In some companies, it's just like the obvious thing to do. Like software companies is a great example, right? Like I spent about 10 years in the Bay Area, and like everybody there that writes software is just like, we can't wait to get this latest AI tool. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter even what it does, right? It's like, we just want to play around with it. Mm-hmm. You know, I pitched a auto supplier last fall, and I had people in the meeting on the team that brought me in actively fighting me as we were writing the proposal. And I'm like, you guys brought me in, you know? So, I mean, that's a culture thing, right? And you're kind of reading the lines there, and it's like, well, they're scared they're going to get replaced. I get that. That's a valid fear, you know? So how can you kind of try to adopt that or, amend that? You say, well, hey, actually, you're going to be able to do more engineering. You're going to be able to land more projects at a lower cost. Right. Well, how do I know you're going to do that? It's like, well, here are the use cases you're talking about, and here are a set of tools or emerging tools that we think are going to be able to enable you to do that. So what you're actually going to do is make yourself more competitive with this Italian company that you guys are always losing bids against, or, you know what I mean? Or this company in Japan, right? Yeah. So that's, you know, but that's a cultural thing, right? It
really is.
Yeah.
And that's coming from leadership, being able to communicate that message frequently. Yeah. Encouraging innovation, encouraging failure. Yeah. It's okay to fail. It's okay to try something and go, this didn't work the way we want. Yeah. And so you course correct and pivot. And I think that if a leader can give that permission and encouragement, and even show themselves that, you know, hey, I tried this and this is how I'm using it. And I think that really puts everybody in a safe space. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll say is it also has to be there in actual deed and action as well, though, because you know, you're going to quickly burn out people who are actually trying new things, and then their performance reviews aren't as good. Yeah, and I've seen that firsthand, not personally, but adjacent with the company I worked with, and like everyone who was actually good just left because they were like, well, this other person got the promotion and I didn't. I'm thinking of one example in particular. And it was like, you know, I don't know all the details, but it seems pretty clear to me that like there was this incentive of like, we need to try new things and try this innovation, but then they weren't rewarded. You know, they rewarded if it wins, but not if it doesn't, right? Right. But that's the nature of innovation. So
it is. It's a balance. It sure is. Yeah. How do you help companies build trust in AI outputs if they can't always see or understand the code or how it works? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is very much kind of this like fundamental trade-off of kind of accuracy and specificity versus interpretability. And it's just an education issue, and just understanding where on that continuum do you want to live. In an automated system like the one I mentioned earlier, where it's your operating an oil machinery thing, it's very easy to show explainability. In a chatbot, no one knows, right? It's just spitting things out. So, you know, there's movements in that direction, you know, like Perplexity kind of famously when they first got started was, we're going to be the chatbot with references, right? Now all of them kind of have different references. But, you know, it's basically an idea of like just teaching people how to think more than anything, and teaching people that there really isn't going to be a 100% ironclad answer, because like, you know, I mean, that's what we have laws and courts and judgment and they're, like defining truth. I know it's a very broad word, but like that's actually really hard. And it's not so obvious, even within the context of certain slightly non-math type problems, right? So I think a lot of it is, saying, well, you live on this continuum, and then asking the question just as compared to what? Like, if you have more information given to an educated, cognitively engaged workforce, how is this not going to make you more successful?
Right.
Like
Individually and collectively.
Correct. Yeah. It's like if you have an employee, you think they're like an expert in, phone systems, and it recommends a system, they're gonna be like, wait, that's not consistent with my understanding. You look into it, you're like, oh, well, that's not a real phone. It hallucinated that, right? It hallucinates products sometimes. It's getting a lot less of that, but
it's learning.
Yeah, it's learning. Yeah. So that's how I try to approach that type of a thing. Yeah.
Good. So what upcoming trends in AI should everyday business owners be aware of?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple different kind of levels to approach that. I think one is just the pervasiveness of it. It's going everywhere, and it's solving problems that maybe you weren't thinking about. So if you looked into this 3 months ago and you're like, oh, our industry's totally safe, no issue, I don't even want to look into that anymore, think again.
Yeah.
So kind of
totally.
Yeah, just the rapid pace of acceleration, and understanding that these are like compounding effects, right? Kind of like we all learn about, compound interest and how it can save, right? Like compounding technology advancement is also very much a thing. So if the chips get twice as fast every year, that suddenly makes certain applications, even with the same software, way more doable, right? Or if the models get twice as fast, which they're all getting faster, and the chips are getting faster, right? And then the cost is coming down, suddenly you end up with like a Jevons paradox kind of thing where it's like, even though this stuff is reducing in cost, the actual usage of it is exploding because people are finding new applications. So that's the one thing that I just really try to emphasize is like, watch out for exponentially changing markets, or even non-exponentially, but just like super linear. Like even if it's just like not that crazy, it's like just keep watching out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Alex, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you.
I know the listeners got some really great nuggets out of it for sure, and we'll make sure to share your blog post so that they can find you. But where can they learn more about your work or connect directly with you?
Yeah, so I work at a company called City Innovations. We're a corporate innovations firm, so you can just reach out to us directly. You can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. The blog I mentioned is Mead at mead.substack.com. So MEAD at Substack. But
cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for listening to Simplicity Conversations. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and visit us at thesimplepodcast.com. You're going to connect and learn more about inspiring leaders like Alex. Follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe on YouTube for more content from Simplicity Conversations.